Welcome everyone to M365 UK. It's our April edition, and I'm Chirag Patel, and it's great to be here today for another month of two great sessions we have today. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Todd Klindt, all the way from US, coming to London for us online, giving up his time and effort. And so big welcome to you, Todd. And so we have good session from Todd on basically all things Office 365, SharePoint, PowerShell, and really kind of, to make your life easier if you're kind of using multiple admin consoles as we normally come to use when we're logging on to M365, and also, some great examples to see with one-liners, as well as some handy PowerShell scripts. And I'm sure you've been following Todd for all these years, but I'll introduce Todd in a second or so. But also we have a second session today from Tomasz Poszytek from Poland. And so his session is going to be about the Power Automate advanced scenarios and the approaches around the using the flow, the tasks that get sometimes stuck, and being able to sort of work with the business process that we have. So real gems of the sessions we have, and demos and everything else. So hopefully a lot to take away from in the next 2 hours or so. So we tend to obviously split the sessions with a 10-minute break, given that this is an online event. So kind of stretch yourselves and get coffee or so around 5 p.m. here. So that's roughly the agenda. And then for those of you who are new to M365 UK, I'm Chirag Patel. I work with Patel Consulting here in London, UK. techchirag.com is the best way to get hold of me, but generally I work with all things Microsoft 365. Started off with SQL Server, SharePoint, Office 365, and so really kind of in the IT pro landscape. I don't really develop as such, or don't write code, but enough to be able to build some solutions over in PowerShell, as well as the PnP practices that we have. So all the work happens around deployment, migrations, and I'm also a certified trainer, so I train courses around SharePoint as well as Microsoft Viva. Twitter M365 UK is the handle, and hashtag M365 UK. So feel free to post any messages, questions, thoughts, anything like that as well. And the chat window is obviously open there as well. So as Todd mentioned, feel free to post your questions, and that would be really great to at least help you out in that ways. Okay, so in terms of how long M365 UK has been around, this has been going on for almost a year, almost 2 years now, I think, especially just after pandemic. I thought this was a bit of in the UK, that was a bit of a gap. So I kind of took the initiative to get started, and it's amazing to see how this has grown, with 850 members and 350 over LinkedIn, Twitter, and I'm really thankful for all of your support. And then, finding all these sessions that's happening almost on a monthly basis now. So it's great to be here. But also, this is not just about us and MVPs or anybody who's got highly amount of experience. Even if you got very little experience in using the technology, you'll be amazed what stories you can share. So I would urge you and would like to welcome you to submit your session for being at M365 UK. So I'll put all these chats, all the links in the chat window shortly. So don't be shy. So please do submit your sessions, and that'll be great. And then M365 UK is generally the handles to go by, whether it's Twitter or YouTube or anything else. So as this session is being recorded, so as soon as sometime by this weekend, it'll be available on YouTube. And M365 UK is the YouTube channel. I also mentioned, for those of you who are following, that I've got something new to announce, and I'm really excited to share that, for the first time after at least 2 years, I'll be doing M365 UK in person at the Microsoft Reactor in London. So, I would have, I'm really excited because I'm hoping that, some of the folks did ask, when this is going to happen. So we're going to have Tom Arbuthnot and Chris Huntingford. Both of them will be there at the reactor in London. So if you head over to meetup.com M365 UK, then shortly you'll be able to register. And so it's in person, like I say, it'll be evening, so slightly different times to what we normally do. So hopefully we'll be able to even try and do that as a hybrid event so that we can make the sessions recording available as well. So we're working on that, so bear with me on that. So let's jump into the session now. So as I mentioned, welcome to Todd. And so, Todd, I've been following Todd for, many, many years now. He's a 16-time MVP. And in fact, probably one of the very few at the time who started working with SharePoint. And he's written a lot of books. He was doing cloud podcast with nearly 500 episodes of it. So, a huge amount of time to the community. And he's working with Simpraxis Consulting at the moment as Office 365, SharePoint architect, doing all things with PowerShell. So I'll probably just at this point hand over to Todd. And yeah, Todd, looking forward to your session. Take it away. Welcome.
Thank you for that warm invitation. Let me see if Teams will let me share my screen. And let me share the correct screen. All right. Okay, now I just want to make sure I get that open. Okay, so I am watching the chat. So thanks to Chirag for inviting me. As for those of you that were here, before we got started, as folks of our age do, we were reminiscing, and he and I have known each other for decades now, and have been working with each other, and it's been a lot of fun. So I'm really glad to be here. I think I just lost Teams again. Teams will not. There we go. Okay. So today, yeah, we're going to talk about PowerShell and Microsoft 365. I've got the chat up. By all means, since we can't do this in person, normally I run a pretty interactive session when I do these, but we're online. It's a little different, but I absolutely welcome you to take yourself off mute if you want to, type a question in, whatever. There's a really good chance that if you're wondering something, if I'm unclear and you've got a question, there's probably somebody else that will do it too. So go ahead and open that up. So this is me, couple of things, my email address, my Twitter handle. Don't be shy. If you come up with a question down the road and you're like, is there a way I can do, that's how to get a hold of me. I can tell you, I used to work at a hosting company, Rackspace, and I was on their SharePoint team. And somebody sent out an email once, is there a way in SharePoint to do blah? And nobody responded. So then like an hour later, they sent another email and they're like, come on, everybody, why didn't you respond back? And then somebody else on the team replied, in times like this, you should do what I do. I just send out an email to the group that says this can't be done in PowerShell. And then I sit back and wait for Todd to give me the solution. So that I'm not saying that always works, but that almost always works. So there's how to get a hold of me if you want to ask those questions. I meant to have the slide deck up on my blog at that URL. I forgot to update it. That may or may not be because I was editing it as Chirag and I were chatting at the beginning, but I'll have that up as soon as this is over. You can get the slides and any transcripts from stuff that I do. All the stuff will be there. You can grab that. I watched last month's episode. First off, I can say that following up Gautam was I'm not qualified. That guy's great. But Chirag promised you all that I would sing and dance PowerShell. Nobody wants that, so I promised not to do that. Got some guitars over here. I could maybe strum a few chords, but I am pretty excited about PowerShell. So don't be afraid to ask me questions. I learned so much when people ask questions about stuff. So this is roughly the agenda. I've already started in the PowerShell loving part. We're going to talk a little bit about some of Microsoft's modules, not because they're any good, but just to give you a good picture on when you would use PNP, why you would use PNP, where it all fits in. And then we'll talk about PNP and go over some examples. One thing I want to mention is last month, Gautam said that he was a dev at heart. And when he showed you the things that he showed you, he very much came at it from a dev perspective. I'm an admin at heart, so I'm going to come at things a little differently than he did. But that's the beauty of all of this. That's the beauty of PowerShell and the PNP is that you don't have to be a dev to use it. It opens up some doors for you, but also as an admin, you can do a ton of really cool things. So don't let the fact that there's code and structure and braces and all of that scare you off. I promise you're smart enough to use it. So I'd been a SharePoint admin for, nearly 10 years when SharePoint 2010 came out. And I remember being at Microsoft and they were showing us the betas and all that. And one of the product managers said, "We have got great news for you. SDS ADM is being replaced with PowerShell. Isn't that awesome?" And I remember, it wasn't quite like my life flashing before my eyes, but I remember seeing, the very first magazine article I wrote about SharePoint was on SDS ADM. The very first book chapter I wrote was about STS ADM. The very first time Microsoft let me get up on a stage and talk about SharePoint was about STS ADM. And that's all going away for this thing, PowerShell. It's got objects and flow control and all these things. And I just remember thinking, I'm not smart enough. Like, I'm going to have to learn how to make hamburgers or clean houses, or like, I'm out. And here I am 12 years later, still doing this stuff. So don't be intimidated by any of this. One of the things that I've really started to focus on in my career is this idea of the maturity model. And we've seen it as a bunch of different things, like the idea of crawl, walk, run, that kind of stuff. I read a really good book a few years called What Got You Here Won't Get You There, that talks about that. For what we're going to do with PowerShell, there are definitely crawl, walk, run, and maturity model ways to do this. I'm going to show different ways of doing things, but just because you're not doing something the way that I'm doing it doesn't mean you're not doing it right. If it works, how can it be wrong? Is the, to quote George Costanza from Seinfeld. So be okay with making mistakes. Be okay with learning. I'll show you some of the beginner stuff. I'll show you some of the more advanced stuff, but it's all okay. It's all about where you're at working through the model. So don't get frustrated by that. Couple of things that Gautam showed last week or last month that were really great. I just watched that video a couple of days ago, so I haven't had a chance to play with it much. But that idea of hitting the graph with the PNP PowerShell, that is awesome. I'm gonna have some stuff on that. Also, the batching, adding items like he was doing, that is good stuff. One of the things he also mentioned, some of the metrics, which is just crazy. 70 million commandlets a day are executed. I think most of those, half-ish, are me trying to figure things out. I've been doing PowerShell and PNP PowerShell for a lot of years. I still screw things up all the time. So again, don't get discouraged. We're all in this together. All right. So first thing that I want to talk about, and my slides aren't advancing, thanks PowerPoint, are some of the environments and how we're going to take advantage of all of this. And my slides still aren't advancing. Okay, so quickly, anything you can do in PowerShell, you can likely do in the UI. There's a lot of nooks and crannies to get into, but it always comes down to this idea of, should I do it in PowerShell? Should I do it in the UI? I do everything in PowerShell these days just because I feel comfortable with it. It's like I'm in the matrix and I'm seeing the code, going through. That's just how I think of things. But PowerShell does give you a couple of things. The first and foremost is everybody wants documentation for processes and things. Nobody actually wants to make documentation about processes and things. And so one good thing about when you're doing PowerShell is you get free documentation. Every one of your steps is built in there. The repeatability and the consistency are kind of go hand in hand. I was talking to Mark Anderson, one of my coworkers here, and we were talking about this. And there's always this struggle, like, should you spend 4 hours automating something that would have taken you 10 minutes to do? I mean, we've all been there. I was there yesterday afternoon. But the good news about that is when you spend that 4 hours, you in 2 months benefit from that. Like, we were looking at some scripts that he'd written, and there was like 17 steps in bringing this thing together. And I'm like, in 3 months, I'm not going to remember what all those steps are if I'd have done it with the UI. But in PowerShell, it's all there. Even if I don't run the PowerShell, I'm not going to forget step 12 or something. So consider using PowerShell even in places where it's just way more work. And one philosophy that I stole from Don Jones, who was a PowerShell MVP for about 60 years, is your idea should be to be the tool maker, not the tool user. And the reason I say that is you should always write your PowerShell as if somebody else is going to have to run it. And that somebody else is angry, bigger than you, and knows where you live. So, make your PowerShell as good as you can. The idea would be that, someday you're not actually ever running the PowerShell, you're writing it for other people to use on their SharePoint environments. Okay, so the first thing that I want to mention is VS Code. So VS Code is my PowerShell, PNP or otherwise, environment of choice. And I won't spend a bunch of time in this, but I do want to bring this up because it will make PowerShell easier for you to use. And when I first started using PowerShell, that learning curve, that just being able to do anything with PowerShell was so tough. And so knowing some of these tricks will help you get up and going. And I don't know what level of PowerShell expertise y'all have. Feel free to jump in the chat and tell me. But VS Code, Visual Studio Code, is free, so you can just go ahead and download it at that URL. It's not just for developers. Those of you that have watched my sessions in the past know that I used to make fun of developers a lot. Used to pick on them, kick them out of sessions here and there when they deserved it. I don't do that anymore for a variety of reasons, legal restraining orders, that kind of thing. But in my defense, I was only doing that when they were doing unseemly things to my beloved SharePoint servers, and they've mostly stopped doing that. And Microsoft's put a lot of guardrails in place. So don't be afraid to do a little developer-y things. But even so, VS Code's not just for developers. So grab it, download it, install it. There is a PowerShell extension. One of the great things about VS Code is all these extensions. There's a PowerShell extension that adds PowerShell IntelliSense and tab completion and lets you set things up. You want to have that. Once you start moving up that maturity model, that crawl, walk, run, another great thing about VS Code is you can use it for source control. So you can write PowerShell scripts and then update them some more, and then realize those updates were horrible and roll them back and see where all that happened. I use GitHub for that, but you can also wire VS Code right into Azure DevOps or whatever. That has saved my butt any number of times. So I definitely, there's some learning on that. That would be almost another session here, is just getting up to speed with that. But it's in there. Start thinking about that. There's also a couple of cool things you can do. There is VS Code on the web, so you can just fire it up in your web browser and use VS Code. And I use that a lot when I'm looking at GitHub repositories of PowerShell code, and I want to see what they're doing before I download them. I can obviously go into GitHub and see it, but it's all kind of yucky. I can also just load it right up in VS Code in the web. The bad news about that is the PowerShell extension that we'll all love and that I love doesn't work in the web version. It does some local things that doesn't work with. But then also there's this website, GitHub 1S, GitHub in a second, that will open stuff in your browser. So that's good stuff there. So make peace with that. I see a lot of PowerShell folks editing it in Notepad, editing it in the ISE. We're past that now, hopefully. Also, just spend a moment, if you haven't already, download the Windows Terminal. It is a host for other consoles, command prompt, Windows PowerShell, PowerShell Core, which is now just called PowerShell, Azure Cloud Shell, all that kind of stuff. I love it. The tabbed interface, you can do a lot of great things with it. Grab that. It's also in the store. That's what I use for everything these days. I don't even use the standalone ones anymore. And finally, get yourself a free dev tenant. So again, you got to sign up. You got to tell Microsoft, hey, I'm Todd, I'm a developer. It feels less dirty than it really is, or it is less dirty than it feels. But that will get you a tenant, a full M365 tenant. It's got a bunch of users, a bunch of content in it. So as you're learning PowerShell with M365 or anything else, you can do it in there without fear of breaking anything important. And that final bullet point, 100% less chance of you'll get sacked, so you won't break anything in production. It's that's in there. So go ahead and grab one of those. Those should automatically update themselves. So they're set to expire like every 3 months or 90 days. They're supposed to update themselves. I had one poop out this week. So keep an eye on that. And that's when you go into the admin thing, licenses, it'll tell you when it expires. Yeah, I would keep an eye on that if you can. One thing, so Gotham talked a little bit about passwords, and I just kind of left the slide in. The slide was already there. There's a couple of really bad ways to do passwords, and this is those. Don't do this. So I only put this here to mention that it's a bad example. Never put your passwords in plain text or anything like that. Windows has a credential manager built in, and what I really like about this is it's all Microsoft's problem to worry about, storing them securely and all that. The folks on the PNP team, as if they hadn't given us enough already, have given us 2 commandlets for dealing with stored credentials, and Gautam showed them last week or last month. But that's what I use. So when I signed up for my new dev tenant 48 hours ago, I got all the passwords. I type the password in once. I type it in once when I store it, and then I never type it in again when I'm doing PowerShell. And so that looks like this a little bit. You can see, and he mentioned it, if you use Connect PNP Online and you have the credentials stored, it will just take them automatically, which is kind of cool. Again, so you just, you add it once and then you do connect and you're just in, like the nice automated slide shows. And that proves that I'm actually connected. Another great benefit to this that he did not mention was that those credentials will work for other things besides PNP PowerShell. So for instance, if you find yourself in a situation where you have to run the SharePoint module, the Microsoft's SPO module, you can do the get stored credential, grab that credential out, and then pass that to Connect SPO service or any of the other ones, Connect Teams, whatever. So I never type those passwords. I just don't do it. I always just do it. And the good news about that is here, I'm not specifying any names. I'm just letting the default in, but I do have named ones. So if you've used any of the dev tenants, you've got, Adele V and Alex W and all those. I have credentials called that. So if I want to sign in with another user, you can also specify that. So, and this is also imperative when you're scheduling anything or running it unattended. If you have MFA, you might be able to get in. That depends entirely on what your MFA provider does. Microsoft Azure AD has a way to set up app passwords, things like that. So you can do that. You can also use credentials, certificates, that kind of stuff. But you can be secure. You can use MFA. You should use MFA and also work with PowerShell. I left the slide in for certificates to kind of remind you how to do that. It's easier than it sounds. There are a couple of commands that you can run. It'll take you 2 minutes tops to set up a certificate. Again, makes it really easy to sign in without having to type any passwords because it's all files and things like that. It also allows you to get into more than just SharePoint. And later, I'm going to talk a little bit about writing Azure functions with PowerShell, and certificates are one great way to do that. So look into that. Again, it's easier than it sounds like it should be. So I've only got like another 30 minutes or so. So I'll make the demos quick because I want to do a bunch of examples. So this is Visual Studio Code, and I wanted to show a couple things about this. This is I've got PowerShell. We'll show this one for now. So I've got Visual Studio up and going. It's what I use for all my PowerShell stuff. There is a PowerShell console terminal at the bottom. I never use that, mostly because I'm just not in the habit of using it. For the longest time, I was writing my PowerShell in Notepad or the ISE and then running it in PowerShell. And so I've just gotten in the habit of that. But this is pretty handy if you're running things. You can run it right in here. You can highlight things up here, and then you can say, run highlight a bit, things like that. So there's a lot of power in this. You can have multiple sessions. So if you want to have multiple things going on, again, I don't ever use that. Not that there's anything wrong with it. You can also see down here, I've selected the language. And so that gives me all the IntelliSense, and you can see that I've got that set up so that it knows how to break things up. If I start typing, it knows how to handle that. So I use that a lot. What else do I have in that slide? I talked about source control. So this is, I can do that. I'm not going to do that now, but I can see here I've got some things in GitHub called TK Tools. This will push them up to GitHub. So if I play with this on another machine, or if this machine reboots in the middle of the night because it's putting on a Windows patch like it did 12 hours ago, if everything's committed and up in the cloud, I can get to it wherever. You can open up folders, things like that. I'm a big fan. This is one of the Azure things. So if you're doing Azure functions, this gets you in there. Big fan of this. Oh, so another thing I want to show. So this is a snippets file. So Visual Studio Code has autocomplete, things like that, but it also has snippets, which the ISE had, the old Control J, you could bring up snippets. Visual Studio has these, and they're a little nicer now. And so here's a couple that I have written, and I use them for things that I know that I should always use, but I can never remember how to use. And so one of them is the correct way to check if something is a null or white space or empty or whatever. You got to do this crazy construction thing with string and is null. I can never remember that. I don't use it very often. So now I have a snippet called check for white space. And if I'm in PowerShell, so this is my PowerShell snippets thing. If I'm in PowerShell and I start typing stuff, it will try to find a snippet for it. And if I hit tab, it will throw this in for me. And then I went a little step further and I read the instructions up here. Don't ever read the instructions. It's like asking for directions or help. But you can put variables in for tab spaces, so you can actually set the snippet up. And if you know the things you're going to need to fill in, you can type it and hit tab, and it will fill all your code out for you. So the null one is one I use all the time. Another one is I've tried, in talking about the maturity model, the crawl, walk, run. In the walk stage here, I'm trying to get myself, instead of having a lot of write outputs and a lot of write hosts, I try to output custom objects. And so, and I'll show that one later here in a minute when I'm showing some examples. But what that allows me to do is take that output from the thing that I wrote and send it to the pipeline. So send it to select objects, send it to export CSV, something like that. But again, I can never remember that structure. So now I've got a snippet called custom object, and it starts filling that in. So I think if this all works well, if I start typing, so this null here, check for space or null, that's the thing that I showed you in there. And if I click that, that is the code. So there's the variable, and it will check that. And I've already got the whole if structure in there. So it's got that. If I do custom object, so that's that, and that's that whole structure. So I don't have to remember how all that works. I wrote all that. And if you have multiple machines, you can set up sync on VS Code, and it will sync all of that snippets and all the settings between all your instances of VS Code. So big fan of that. VS Code's kind of scary. I get it, but it's well worth your time to take a look at. All right. Back to the slides, because everybody's like, this is fun, but we want more PowerPoint. Yeah, PowerPoint. All right. So, one of the things that you have to do a lot is connect to Azure AD if you want to do usery things, users that are connecting to SharePoint. I bring this up only to emphasize what a damn mess this is with PowerShell right now. The old tried and true MS Online module, which originally came out on stone tablets, it's been out that long, but it uses one of the old security, and I'm going to get them mixed up. I think it uses ADOL and not MCell. Chirag's nodding his head. Good. So it sort of works for a lot of things. And again, it's just, you'll see some examples in here where I still use it. But as that security, as that security endpoint starts getting closed down, stuff's not going to work. That's deprecated, which means at any moment, Microsoft could pull the rug out from under you and it might not work anymore. They replaced that with Azure AD module, and that was newer, but now that's getting deprecated. So don't get too comfortable in that one. But that does the same kind of things. I find myself using MS Online for licensing things. It's easier for assigning licenses to users if you're not using the group stuff. The other thing is I was just, kvetching a few minutes ago about my dev tenant expiring. When that happened, I thought to myself, man, it would be great if I could have known 2 days earlier that this was going to happen. Sounds like a job for PowerShell. So I started poking around in PowerShell to figure out when the license expires. I can't find any way to get that information except with the MS Online module. Now, I haven't gotten into Graph yet, so the Graph might give it to me, but it's just a mess. So if you get frustrated with this, it's because it's a frustrating experience. But those both do similar things. One of the things you're also going to have to probably use once in a while is the SharePoint module from Microsoft. So I bring that in here. I have this slide up for 2 reasons. Number one, because I want to set your expectations appropriately low, that you're probably going to be frustrated when you use it. And also because I wanted to have a picture of the Princess Bride, because it's one of my favorite movies. And one of the, the greatest lines in there is, get used to disappointment. that's just the mindset you have to go in with SharePoint Online. The PNP folks have done a fantastic job of keeping up with this module. So new things, new functionality, the management of new functionality will always show up in PowerShell first, and that's a Microsoft-wide thing. And so anything for SharePoint Online will show up in the SharePoint Online module first. Now, the reason for that is because when they're playing with things like multi-geo and hub sites and all that, when those things were first introduced, there was no UI that you could use to tweak them. You had to do it with PowerShell. That was for two reasons. Number one, they didn't have to worry about where on what web page to put those controls and where it would look if it was on the phone or whatever. And the other thing was internationalization. Just put it all in English and put it in PowerShell. So it'll always show up here first. The PNP folks have done a great job of, as soon as something shows up in the SPO module, getting it into the PNP module. So you don't have to use this as much as you used to, but it is a necessary evil for a lot of things. And that's how you install it. You'll feel embarrassed when you do. This is how you connect to your tenant. You've all done that. And I don't have it in here, but remember, you can, if you've got a stored credential through the PNP, you can use that to connect and not have to type your password here. The graph, this is, boy, what a mess this is all. So the Graph SDK, why they call it an SDK, a software development kit, as opposed to a module, is because the PowerShell SDK is part of a bigger family. There's JavaScript SDKs and all that. So the Graph team, in one of many examples of how they're just not in tune with PowerShell, called this an SDK, but it's a module. It's on GitHub. It is not a great experience. The way that this module is generated is with a process called AutoRest, which is a process that hits all of the endpoints in Graph or whatever you're generating a module for, and then creates a PowerShell function or commandlet for every one of those. So the last time I checked, this module had 800 or 900 commandlets, and it had it for every single thing you could think of. And normally when I'm trying to figure out how to do something with PowerShell, I'll start poking around with the command names and try to figure out what it is. But like even OneNote, so if I wanted to create like a new OneNote page or a new OneNote section, there was several hundred on there that just had OneNote in the name. So it's just unwieldy. And again, it was generated by a machine, so it's tough to use. But unfortunately, this is the way things are going. So we're just gonna have to get used to it. Gautam's thing, that's why Gautam's thing last week on using the PNP and then using the Graph endpoints has me so excited, because I think that might be a way around it. And the way to get those endpoints, like he showed the me endpoint, if you use the Graph Explorer, you can pull it out of there. So I plan on playing with that a little bit more and blogging it. But this Graph SDK, you will hate it. And don't let the adorable giraffe, change your mind. It's a bad experience. One other thing that I wanted to mention is there's no Office 365 groups module. It's, groups aren't really an object you can play with. It's all another module. So I'm going to show later. You just have to figure out which module works best for you. But there is not one in there. When we're talking about modules, you can update them. I'm going to talk about this a little more in another slide, but they do update frequently. The PNP updates at least once a month, something like that. So you want to keep that thing up to date. They add a lot to it. I've got a blog post on how to do it, and that's a shameless plug for that. Also, I wanted to show how for like the 12th year running, SharePoint 2010 is the premier public blogging platform. I don't know how it wins every year, but SharePoint 2010 just is an awesome blogging platform, and I'm proud to be a part of that. But yeah, so you do want to keep your modules up to date, PowerShell or a PNP or not. So I think we will skip. There's really not much to demo there. Let's get into the actual PNP. So I can't tell from the chat room, but if you want to put something in there, I'm watching on that screen there. If you played with the PNP PowerShell, what you think of it and all that, but it's one of my favorites. There was a time, so I did a talk in Australia 9 or 10 years ago, and I did it on-prem SharePoint PowerShell, and it was a rave success. Everybody loved it. They carried me around on their shoulders. The Queen sent a nice letter. It was really great. So then the next year, when I submitted for that same conference, they said, hey, your PowerShell session went great last year. I'm like, I know. And they said, so can you do it on this new SharePoint Online thing? I'm like, absolutely. For a trip to Australia, are you kidding? Absolutely. So I wrote up my abstract. They accepted it and all that. And at that point, the SPO module had 34, 33 commandlets to it, whereas the on-prem SharePoint at that point had 600, something like that. So I had to find some creative ways to show how to use PowerShell with SharePoint Online. Shortly after that, the PNP really came into existence, and I just could not love it more because it makes so many of these things so much easier. So Chirag mentioned, got to mention that there's different versions. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but it is as easy as just installing this module, and then I always do a get command to see what's in there. And let's talk about some of my favorite ones. Also, there are some SharePoint Online ones. Again, we'll talk about that in a couple of slides. They don't necessarily replace each other. They complement each other, augment each other. You don't necessarily have to choose. This slide could have been this session. It is just some of my favorite commandlets, and this slide changes from time to time as I'm doing different tasks. I threw this slide in mainly to whet your appetite on what things you can do with the PNP PowerShell, because there's just a million things that we do during our days as SharePoint admins, and we just don't always think about automating them. So the PNP file noun has a whole lot of great things in there. I'm going to show you how to upload files, things like that. So I've got a couple of processes I've written for myself and for customers where something happens, some inferior system generates a report, that's not SharePoint Online, and they want to have that report uploaded to SharePoint every night. If you know how to use PowerShell, schedule task in Windows, add PNP file, Bob's your uncle. Your file's uploaded. So there's a lot of great stuff in there. Move PNP file, rename PNP file. I end up using those a lot with migrations, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the demo thing. There's a lot of weird migration scenarios that the PNP lets you take the edge off of a problem or slice a little bit off the problem so that some other tool can handle it well. Move PNP file, rename PNP file, a couple of those. Set PNP file checked in is one of those. If you've ever tried to migrate files, some tools can't handle files that are checked out. Not a problem. You can write a pretty easy batch script that will go check all those in. For PNP lists, there is a lot of great provisioning framework inside of the PNP PowerShell, and provisioning is stamping out sites, stamping out lists, using site designs, using site scripts, all that. I'll be honest, because all that stuff didn't exist 5 or 6 years ago in the form that it does, I still build a lot of these things programmatically. So add PNP lists, set PNP lists to get those lists just perfect. I do that a lot. The line between a SharePoint list and a SharePoint document library is very blurry. It's almost like a document library is a list, but a list of documents. It's all very confusing. That get PNP list item obviously gets list items. I think you probably all pieced that together, but it also gets documents. So it is a way to get information, whereas get PNP file will actually get the contents of the file. Will get you a blob of binary stuff that is a Word document. Get PNP list item will get you the owner, the metadata, those kind of things. So if you're working with documents with PowerShell and you can't figure out how to do a thing, get PNP list item is one to take a look at. Get PNP property is one that I learned very late and still forget about. And this is one that lets you pull a specific property of an object. So for those of us that learned how to do PowerShell on-prem, that PowerShell snap-in that comes with SharePoint Server goes directly against the object model. So if we grab a site or something like that, we get all of the properties for whatever it is we hit, the SP site, the SP web, whatever, and then we can do whatever we want with them. Now that things are in the cloud, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And it doesn't make a lot of sense for a couple of reasons. Number one, all of this traffic is going back and forth across a very skinny wire as opposed to just hitting the object model in RAM. So they have to be efficient about that. And number two, one of the things about the cloud is it's so much easier to create lots and lots of things. And so the number of documents I see in SharePoint Online is much greater than I ever saw in SharePoint On-Prem. So not only do we have more things, we have more things about the things. And so what the PnP team and what all, a lot of cloud folks have done is they will give you the schema of the object, the structure of the object, and then they will choose the properties they think you're going to use when you do a get PnP list item or something like that. But it might not always be the one you want. So get PnP property says, I've got this list item. I tried to see if it was checked out. That property was empty. Get PnP property gets me that property for that list item. And I've got a demo that shows it later. That one takes some getting used to, because if you're like me, you get an object, you do a get member on it, you find the property you want, like, that's the one. I want to see if this is true, or if it's more than a week old, or, if Sheila's the owner or whatever. And then you try to write some if statements and nothing works. It might be because that property's empty. I fall for that all the time. Adding views and adding fields, I use that all the time. And that's, I've got a view that I like. I've, designed it, and I can just stamp it out wherever I want. Get PnP field, that's the columns in your lists and libraries. Restore PnP recycle bin item. I have a hysterical example of that I'll show you in a couple of slides. One of my favoriteest stories ever. But these are just some of my favorites, just to kind of get your juices flowing and get you some ideas. So Robert mentioned in the chat that PnP list item, and then working with list items on-prem PowerShell, and then it was, it's completely different in online. I felt that pain too, Robert. So we've talked about authentication, the stored credential bit. One thing I want to mention is the PnP Connect PnP Online is smart enough. It will obviously connect. It'll pull a stored credential for a site that you've given, so the tenant.sharepoint.com. But it's also smart enough that if it doesn't find one, so if it doesn't find one for sites/HR, it starts peeling it back at the slashes to see if there's any matches. So if we add that PnP stored credential, it will connect to tenant.sharepoint.com. But it will also connect to sites.hr or slice.hr, because there isn't a slice/r credential, so it does pull it back. So that is those PnP folks, they've thought of everything. So that wanted to mention that. This slide, I'm not going to talk about a bunch, but I do get a lot of pushback from customers on using the PnP PowerShell because it's not an official Microsoft thing. Security folks get a little wiggity about it. So these are just some facts for you to throw in people's faces. A bunch of these numbers are way outdated now because the PnP has just exploded. Kind of the key thing is Vesa Juvonen is a senior program manager. I can't remember, his title just changed at Microsoft. Vesa's kind of a big deal, and he's got his eyes on this. So there's no shady shenanigans going on with this. Vesa gives it a thumbs up. And the other really big point is that this code is signed with Microsoft's signing key and has been for 5 years. So Microsoft doesn't just let anybody do that. Not going to let me do it. Not going to let you do it. So that's kind of a big deal. So if anybody's boss doesn't let them use the PnP PowerShell for some sort of a solution, show them the slide. If this still doesn't do it, get a hold of me. I'll write you a note. We'll get this figured out. But it's absolutely every bit as legitimate as any other module out there. The question often comes up, when to use the PnP module and when to use the SPO module. And this list has gotten different over the years because the PnP module has just become so great. And so it's my default now. There's just a lot of times where I don't even consider SPO if I don't have to. But generally, if it's a tenant-wide thing that you're setting, like multi-geo or something, maybe SPO. Basic tasks, the smallest object you can handle in the SPO module is a site or a site collection, so you can't really go much for there. New functionality that hasn't made it into the admin center yet or hasn't made it into the PnP PowerShell yet, those are two things that you would do. Everything else you do in PnP and you love it. So it can do everything that SPO can do, but better. One of the great things is since it connects with CSOM, you don't have to be a tenant admin to use it. So with SPO, you're connecting to your tenant site. You have to be a tenant admin or a SharePoint admin or something. With PnP, you can be anybody, which is why, like I mentioned earlier, I have the Alex W and the Adele V. You can be an end user. You can be help desk. You can be whatever. You can write scripts using the PnP PowerShell that don't require high-level permissions, as long as that user has permissions to do those things. very site-specific things. If you want to be a little cooler with your coworkers, a little straighter when you walk, a little more bounce in your step, the PnP PowerShell will do that. Also, the PnP PowerShell is starting to spread out. It's not just SharePoint anymore. There's a lot of Teams things. They've really done a tremendous job of filling in gaps. So it's my weapon of choice most of the time. This is a fun one. I can't explain how much fun that I've had with this. I am not a developer. Like, I can't C#, I can't JavaScript, I can't do any of those things, but I can PowerShell mostly. And so I had a customer who needed some provisioning done, and they needed very specific things done. None of the provisioning frameworks really works for them, and they're all in SharePoint Online. And so I got to look, and an Azure function is exactly what we wanted to do, but I can't write them in C# or anything. But you can write Azure functions in PowerShell. And it is PowerShell Core or PowerShell 7. And wouldn't you know it, the PnP PowerShell loads up in PowerShell 7. It works great in Azure Functions. So for this one, what I did for them was they were moving from on-prem to online. They had a form that they had to create when they wanted to generate new sites. That wrote to a list that they had hundreds and hundreds of these sites and when they were created and all that. And so I created a flow that watched that list. And when a new item was put on that list, it created a JSON blob that dropped it into an Azure queue, and then an Azure function kicked off and created the site and did a bunch of customization and emailed this person and entered into that thing. Worked like a champ. That's been working for over a year now. And I've just had a great time with this whole process. So a couple of things that I had to get up to speed on: using certificate authentication, because this Azure function needs to be able to connect as somebody who has the permission to create site collections and things like that. I wrote it all in VSCode, and if you add the Azure extension to VSCode, you can publish that Azure function right in with source control. You can test it locally. You have a console in the Azure function where you can watch your PowerShell run, so any write hosts, write outputs show up in there. And then you can also turn on logging so that all of that gets saved to a log file. So if something ever goes wrong with your Azure function, you can go back and check it out. Love all this. All right, last slide before we get to the examples. One of the things that I wanted to make sure you all knew were that you can have multiple versions of the same module installed, and you can have multiple modules with the same commandlets installed all at the same time. Eat all you want, still lose weight. So last month, Gautam mentioned that they have a nightly build of PnP, and he was right. You throw something in GitHub that you don't like, someone's likely going to code it, and it's going to show up the next day in there. But what happens if you don't want to use that nightly build for all of your things? You can have multiple versions. So he mentioned that when you do the install, you can do the allow pre-release. If you use find module, find looks out into the cloud, looks to see where your PS galleries. So that's how you would see if there was a nightly build and what they were, and then the all versions. When you do the install module for the nightly version or any other version or whatever, you can specify a version that you want. So the example that I have at the bottom, it has an import module, but it would work for install as well. Install module name PnP PowerShell. The current version of PnP PowerShell is 1.10.0. So if you just do install module PnP PowerShell, you get 1.10.0. But what if something's broken in that? But it wasn't broken at 1.9 and you really need 1.9. You can leave 1.10 on your system, but you can do install module name PnP PowerShell required version 1.9 or 1.8 or whatever, and it will install it. The allow clobber commandlet says allow this module that you're installing on your system to clobber over top of commandlets that already exist. That's handy for having multiple versions of the same commandlet or module. That's also handy if you want to keep the old PnP module, the one that hasn't been updated in a couple of years. If you want to keep that one handy, that's also got, get PnP site, all that kind of stuff. The reason you might want to do that is because that one doesn't require the Azure AD registration. So I've been in environments where people couldn't do the Azure AD registration. Gautam talked about that last month, that the new PnP module requires. So they have to use the old one if the functionality they need is there. So that would be one reason. Another thing that you can do with that registration he didn't mention last week was if you as the SharePoint admin don't have permission to create Azure AD registrations, when you use that command that he used, register application, there is an option for giving the URL. and you can pass that URL off to somebody in your security department or your Azure AD department. They can register the application in Azure AD, and then you can use it. So that's a good one there. So allow clobber and the preferred version. And then for the import, so install says take the bits, throw them on my system. Import says in this particular PowerShell environment that I'm in, the host or a script or whatever, load this module in so that I can use it. PowerShell normally handles that for you. You don't have to worry about it. But if you're in a situation where you need a specific version of this module or any module, in your code or in your window, you can say import module, give it the name, give it the specific version that you want. And then if you need to have multiple versions of it installed, so you need that new version, new functionality that was in the nightly version, but the stability of the old version, you can do prefix and it will add a prefix to the nouns. So if I were to do that, then to use the 1.9 version of get SPO site, I would say get dash old SPO site, and that would use the 1.9 version. Get SPO site or get PNP site would get the new version. So on the maturity model, this is a way out, but I just wanted to mention it to you in case you're ever in a situation where I wish I could do the, oh, that one guy with the funny accent, he mentioned something about that. Hit me up on Twitter. Okay. So I've got, what, 5 minutes left-ish?
About 10.
10? Oh, man, that's awesome. Okay, 10 it is. So this one, quick one, again, all these slides will be able to be downloaded. This is just a quick example of how to upload a file to SharePoint Online with the PNP. You connect, that's the name of the file. The thing that I wanted to point out in this slide is the folder parameter is a document library. Yeah, we could get into object models and all that kind of stuff. You don't care. The thing to remember is when you do add PNP file, where it says folder, they mean document library. So that's that example there. Okay, the next one is to add a folder. So you remember a few minutes ago when I told you when the PNP says folder, they mean document library. Well, sometimes they also mean document library and folder. So thanks SharePoint for that. So in this one, I want to upload a document, but I don't want to upload it to the root of the shared document library. I want to upload it to a folder. So I add a PNP folder. I cleverly call it folder 1 to the folder shared documents. And then when I upload my file, I upload it to the folder, which is really my document library, and folder 1. You can't make this stuff up, but that's how you got to do it. So it can be done. This one actually doesn't work because the modules have or the commands have changed, but it has a couple of things that I wanted to mention. So this shows how to loop through the document libraries in your web and do something. So I found myself having to use this top line or a couple lines a bunch of times. So I've just kind of put it in here. So I'm saying get PNP list. And we've already talked about how document libraries are really lists. So when you do get PNP list, you get all your lists and you get all your libraries, but you get a bunch of them. And I don't want the system lists. I don't want forms and all that kind of stuff. And I only want the ones that are document libraries. So I do get PNP list. We talked about the properties. And so sometimes all the properties don't come down from the cloud. Default view URL and is system list are two of the properties that don't come down. So I could do the get property bit, but I can also specify it with get PNP list. Not all of the get commands do this, but this one does. So I say get the list, include these two properties because I'm going to use them. And then I say where the is system list is false. So I don't want the system lists. And then the base type is equal to document library. So what this gets me is all my document libraries that are not system document libraries. So what do I do then? Well, I've assigned that to doclib list. And now I do a for each doclib and doclib list, and then I can do get the list of the items in the list. Again, and it's documents. It says list item, but it's documents. And then do a thing. That thing doesn't work. They've changed these fields, so this code doesn't actually work. The piece to remember about this is how you loop through. So if you wanted to, check for something else, this is how you would do that. This one adds to that. This one has the same beginning. So get all the document libraries in my site, all those kind of things, walk through them. I want to get some other properties, though. I want to get the content type and the compliance info. These are also properties that don't come down by default when you do get list item. So I need to get my list items And then I need to pipe those through for each and use get PNP property and tell get PNP property to pull those properties down for me so that I can do something with them later. So client object, that's the whole, fill in the blank, the current object, get the property file, content type, and compliance info. So now that variable doc list, all the objects in there are hydrated with those properties now. So now we can do things with them. And then I run that through a list for every doc in doc list. I create a custom object. I talked about that before. Instead of doing a write output or a write host, I do a custom object and I spit those things out. So that gives me the compliance info. So this one was part of a bigger script that I wrote for a customer a long time ago about wanting the compliance info on files. But it shows how to use that get property and loop through and pull those out. And then it's got the custom object a bit in it. All right, kids, this is one of my favorite stories ever. I'll try to tell it quick, but I do love it. So I got an email from one of my SharePoint friends a few years ago. They were in a bit of a pickle. One of their customers had a document library, OneDrive, I think. I don't remember it, but we'll call it a document library, that they had every picture they'd taken for their organization since the beginning of time. And they did the thing where they had a single document library, because that's a best practice, having one document library for everything, and had hundreds and hundreds of folders and hundreds of thousands of pictures. Again, every picture of every event that has ever happened. So they had somebody, one of their office staff or whatever, who was syncing that library to their machine with the OneDrive client, and saw all that and thought, wow, this is really taking up a lot of space on my computer. I should get rid of this. And went into Explorer and deleted it all, not understanding that delete was then syncing up to the cloud. And because it was so many documents, it took a really long time. So several hours later, this user noticed the little sync thing going and hovered her mouse over it and saw deleting, and freaked out, panicked. Shut her machine off. I don't know how she stopped all that from happening. She was really embarrassed about what she did. So she turned her machine back on and started collecting like the digital camera cards and all that stuff and tried to put all of the files back that she had deleted. But by that time, she had deleted 100,000 or something like that in those hours. So then several days after the deleting and several days after the copying back in of some amount of those files and several days after other people in the organization didn't realize that had happened and had been uploading new files of their own, they reach out to their SharePoint person. And they're like, how do we get out of this? So I said, well, it was almost as if they said, you can't do this in PowerShell. This was a freebie. I did this one for fun. So what I did, I used get PNP recycle bin item, and I got all the items. And then I said, okay, so I've got some things that I know. I know that the file is a JPEG. So the property leaf name is JPEG. Okay, so that's because again, they had everything there, documents, whatever. And then I knew it was going to be in one of the folders inside of that document library. So now the dir name is like, photos. Okay. And then where the property deleted by email equals to this person. So I could find all of the files that this person had deleted, only of this type, only in this directory. Okay, so that came back. I did bin.count and it was way over 100,000. It was like 120,000 files, something like that. So now I'm halfway there. I know which files. I've got the restore PNP recycle bin. Cool, let's do that. So then I just loop through bin for each of them. I put a counter in there because, man, I wanted to see that happen. So write the number and the file name, and then restore that file, false, increment my counter so I can see what happened. And then when it's done, just print out what time because I had no idea how long this was going to take. So I started running this and realized that it was going to take 4 days, I think, to recover all these files because there were just so many. So then the next step is I broke it down and I took bin and I did this thing where if you've got a collection of items, you can use brackets and get so many. And I broke it down into chunks of 10,000 files and started running it in multiple PowerShell windows on one box until I got to where that kind of peaked out. And then I started running it on multiple boxes. Because again, it's all in the cloud, right? It doesn't matter. The client was definitely the bottleneck. So after I had this running in about 6 different places, it got done in a couple hours. So that was a fun one. I love that one. The next 2 slides I'll go over quick because I don't want to run over time. These two. Go ahead.
I was going to say, whoever's unmuted, just if you don't mind, mute yourself, please. Carry on, Todd.
All right. Yep. So this was just this slide and the next slide just goes to show there are multiple ways to do the same thing, and it's not always the same. So this creates a new site and Office 365 group. If you do it with SPO, it just does the SharePoint site. No group, no team, nothing like that. You can groupify it later, but it just does the site. If you use new PNP site, I haven't tested this in a while. I think it's actually a new PNP tenant site now, but it will create the group unless you tell it not to, but it doesn't create the team. But if you do it with new team, well, when you create the team, then it has to create the group and all that, and that does it all. So this was just kind of an example of you can do things multiple ways depending on which module you're already using. You might want to do it in PNP just because you're already doing that. But if you know it's going to be needing teams and you're going to be doing some team stuff anyway, do it there. But I just wanted to mention that. I mentioned some of the site provisioning things. This is a really terrible example, but again, it's just to kind of get you excited about it. There are a bunch of commandlets in the PNP for creating templates of things, lists and webs and all that kind of thing. So this is a really cruddy example that does that. The real gold on this slide is the bottom where it says get command module PNP PowerShell name G star temp, which will give you all of the commandlets in the PNP PowerShell that start with G, get, and then have the word temp in them. And there's a handful, 10, something like that. And that will let you see all the things you can get templates for. And of course, if you can get the template, you can do something with it. But this is a great way to stamp out exact copies of sites, things like that. I can't remember if the PNP PowerShell handles this better or not, but I wanted to show that the Power Apps and the Flow stuff's kind of cruddy for getting owners and things like that. I'll kind of gloss past that. I think PNP does this better now. This is one I had to do for a customer and I cried. They wanted to disable the Flow button. So I basically just showed if you do with SPO, it's horrible and 74 lines and your fingers hurt. Or if you do with PNP, it's 1 line and you're golden. Okay, so last slide, fun links to click. My blog is up there. You can go to toddklindt.com/blog. If you go to toddklindt.com/posh or PowerShell, it will take you to all of my PowerShell blog posts. SharePoint Diary is a good place. I steal a lot of that guy's PowerShell. You should too. It's for pretty good stuff. He does a tremendous job. He does the PNP version, but he also does it in CSOM. I love that guy's stuff. Office 365 IT Pros, that's Tony Redmond and a bunch of his crew. He's got some great PowerShell there. He's been an Exchange guy since the beginning of time. He's got some good things. There is like one big AKA URL you can use for M365 PNP. That's the one that gets you everywhere else. And then, and one thing to do there is they've got a sample gallery and you can look for PowerShell samples. So don't reinvent the wheel, go out there and do it, and then get that dev tenant. And finally, my contact information again. I promise while Tomasz is doing his piece, I will quietly in the background upload those slides and stuff. And I'll be in the chat room if people have questions and stuff too.
Great stuff. Todd, thank you very much. Wow.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me anytime.
No, absolutely. No. Thank you for being here. And I think, we can probably head over to the audience, the attendees, for any questions and things. But I think you're absolutely right. I think there's, sheer lots of stuff to cover off in terms of like all the PowerShell modules and the sheer scope of it, right? So I think Malika has got a very interesting observation, and to some extent, I do agree with you there, Malika. I think is that, and certainly from my experience, I found that in the beginning when I had to look after a customer's tenant, for example, where you're using Teams, SharePoint, and in the beginning it really gets tough because used to be that commandlets and syntax and all these things. But if I can assure you, certainly, compared to 5 years ago, we're in much better place today in terms of the ease of use. But I'll probably let you cover that off, Todd. But if anybody's got any questions as well, please do unmute yourself and just go for it.
Yeah, and Malika, my apologies if it was too technical, but I will also say that I open my door on Twitter or email for your dumbest, simplest, most embarrassing PowerShell questions. because a lot of people are embarrassed to ask simple questions, beginner questions, especially because they feel like it's a dumb question. I will tell you, in 20 years of doing talks and writing books and all that kind of thing, dumb questions are the easiest for me to answer, and they make me look the smartest. So I don't mind your dumb questions at all. I don't mind your beginning questions. We've all been there. So I get that this was very technical, but if you're trying to do whatever, my door is open to you.
Yeah. No, thanks, Todd. I couldn't agree more. And I'm probably one of those. I always ask some daft questions wherever I am, even with my customers as well as colleagues. So yeah, absolutely. As long as you get answered. But one thing I would say, I attend a lot of conference events and things. This is probably one session that I think Todd covers all angles of PowerShell. What you will find in other sessions, you will have very specific aspects of PowerShell. But hopefully this will give you a good starting point, and some real examples in there are the easiest ones to get started. But yeah, I'm just conscious of time wise, because I mean, it's not a problem, but I think what I would like to say is I think I've put a link in the chat window for all the attendees. So please do fill out your feedback forms. There's only about 4 questions, so that will really help Todd. And if there's anything specific you would like to see when Todd does this session again, then that would also help him out. So please feel free to put your comments. Yeah. And yeah, so I think with that, I just want to say, big thanks to you, Todd, and would like to welcome you back again in the future for any other content sessions. But I think we'll take a break from. Once again, thanks everyone. Welcome back to M365 UK. Hopefully you saw Todd's session on all things PowerShell. And for those of you who missed it, then don't worry. Recording will be provided so that you could catch up. But yeah, in the meantime, for those of you who are new to M365 UK, welcome back. And my name is Chirag Patel. I organize and host on a monthly basis M365 UK. And for those of you who also missed earlier, for the first time since M365 UK has started, I'll be hosting in-person event next month in London. So we have 2 great legendary speakers, Tom Arbuthnot and Chris Huntingford, covering all things around Microsoft Teams, voice call plans around those sort of things, as well as the Power Platform in general, all the awesome functionality. So hopefully you can make that. Obviously, if you do want to travel across the country, that will be even better. But yeah, so I'm working on the hybrid event side of things. So hopefully we can make that work remotely as well. So do keep a check on the M365 UK. Okay, so gives me a great pleasure to welcome Tomasz Poszytek on the Power Automate Advanced Scenarios. Tomasz is a Microsoft MVP in business applications, but he does a lot more in community. We often bump into each other at various events, both here in the UK and somewhere in Europe. So, I'm sure some of you have come across, and he's a YouTube videoholic, if you like to call it. And so, yeah, great stuff in the community, and I couldn't be more happy to welcome him to M365 UK. So with that, Tomasz, it's all yours. Take it away.
And so thank you very much for having me today. So welcome, good afternoon, everyone. Well, obviously, I prefer to meet you in person because, well, after the first taste of the in-person events again, then all those virtual ones don't feel the same, or then they don't taste the same as they used to for the last 2 years. But well, this is what we have today, and I'll just do my best to to show you the content the way that I find the most interesting. So the reason why I'm actually oh, I need to turn the sharing, sorry, the screen sharing. Oh, you see, that's another thing. I thought it's already working.
Great, we can see it.
Right, I'll just move you away. And yeah, I'll have the look at the chat as well. So if you have any questions, as Todd said, you can simply write them on the chat, or you can unmute yourself. I would be even more happy if you could unmute yourself and start a discussion. So nevertheless, possibly this topic that I'm presenting is known to some of you, but hopefully not. And I've been actually presenting that topic at other events already, but the reason I'm still trying to teach others, or to show this findings of this deep dive into approvals to others is because I find it extremely interesting, because what we have out of box in Power Automate and Microsoft Teams approvals is maybe not limited, but okay, it is limited. So we're not able to really accomplish many scenarios that we were able to do, for example, in SharePoint on premises using the SharePoint Designer. However, after many, well, I wouldn't lie if I say many months of testing and experimenting, I somehow found out a way how much more can be squeezed from those regular approvals using the Dataverse approach. So, no, here. All right, my name, as Chirag already said, is Tomasz Poszytek. I know the last name is really difficult, so you don't need to really struggle to pronounce it. I am working with processes ever since I remember. I mean, well, I've been doing this for intranets and business applications. However, processes and business workflows was always something that was in the center of my interest. And even when I was working with SharePoint 2010 and on-premises versions of SharePoint, I was always somehow trying to focus on processes. Well, especially with first with SharePoint Designer, then I moved over to Nintex. And with Nintex, I somehow acknowledged one day that there is Power Automate of Microsoft Flow about to be released in a public preview, and then I started to work with Power Automate. And to be honest, I haven't been doing any on-premises projects for, I think, nearly 4 years already. So on-premise is somehow the story of the past for myself. So anyways, if you're interested in connecting with me or following me on my YouTube channel, there you will find a lot of interesting content. I'm usually recording and writing about those more challenging things I'm facing. So you will not find a lot of 100 level content, just more really sophisticated and complex cases and solutions. And I was as well thinking today whether we should go really through all the basics around approvals. So if you'd be, well, if you could write down in chat window whether you know all these basics, like what actions we have in Power Automate for approvals, how we can post an approval to Microsoft Teams and so on, then I won't go through that. I'll just focus on the most interesting things. So once again, if you know basics around Power Automate approvals, just like say +1 or yes in chat window. And if nothing is coming, then
yeah, don't be shy, everyone. You can. I must say, I don't use it on a daily basis, so sometimes I learn a lot. So absolutely,
Right. So because like the next slides are really quite easy. Okay, I mean just go really briefly through them so that we are okay on the same side. Okay, more and more people are writing. I know basics. All right. So maybe let's say this way. So if you know basics, then I will not really focus on them. If you would like really to know, then you can either like jump over to my YouTube channel or just read documentation. It's just really like how you can create approvals, what kind of approvals we have in Power Automate, how you can use this adaptive card that is being generated by the create an approval action to use it in Microsoft Teams, and how we can use, for example, the Microsoft Teams templates, approval templates that extend somehow this basic functionality of approvals, but this is only available in Microsoft Teams, and it's using Microsoft Forms on the other hand. So it's as well something maybe not very new, but is as well not very old. Nevertheless, what I wanted to really focus today are those advanced scenarios that rely on the Dataverse. Now, why? Well, because all the data that we are, all the data that's generated during the Power Automate approvals and Microsoft Teams approvals as well is being stored within the Dataverse, excluding that custom form you could create in Microsoft Teams approval templates, because that one is built using Microsoft Forms. However, there is as well information within Dataverse how to get information for that Microsoft Forms, so we can like gather all information together using Power Automate. And obviously you can as well find that in one of those YouTube videos. Anyways, the structure of Dataverse behind approvals is a bit more complex. There are like 3 more tables that are taking part in all this approval process. However, I personally haven't found any direct interaction between data stored in those 3 additional tables while the process is being completed or while it's being executed, and other data. So this is the reason why I excluded those tables. And I am focusing only on those where the data is really live and it's being updated and modified through the steps of the approvals. So the first and the most important table is the table called approval. This is where Power Automate and Microsoft Teams as well, or maybe in general, the approval service is storing the information about the approval, like the header, where you can find the title of the approval, the description, who is the initiator, if the notifications should be sent, if reassignment should be possible. And in the end, once the approval is completed, there is as well information about the outcome that approval was given. Now, the approval request table is, as you can imagine, a table that holds information about every single task that is being generated during the approval. So if you assign a task to 10 employees, then here in approval request, you will find 10 entries with approval ID being a lookup to the approval table, 1 for each employee. And this table only stores information like to whom the task is assigned and when it was assigned. It doesn't actually store any more information that is really important from the approval perspective. Now, approval response, again, quite easy to imagine, is the one that stores information about every single task that is completed. So if you have assigned a task to the employees and you're waiting for them to respond, then every response is going to be recorded as a single entry in approval response table, together with when it was completed, what was the outcome of that response, what were the comments, and of course, who made that response. Now, the user table is connecting all these other tables together because in Dataverse, we don't have like the Azure AD identifiers when thinking about users who are participating or creating records or having an access to the records. But there is this user table that maps information so that it maps actually the AAD and Dataverse ID of the user. So whenever you want to find what is the ID of the user for a given email within Dataverse, you need to first look up the users table. And then the last table that once I during my investigation found out what is its real strength, then I mean, that was like a breakthrough for me. So the flow approval table actually stores information about every instance in Power Automate that uses any of those start approval or start and wait for approval actions, or wait for approval as well. So whenever you create a Cloudflow and you trigger it, then every instance will write information to this flow approval table. Every action, every approval action will write a separate entry in that table. Now, the action that actually waits for the approval to be completed not only writes information about the flow, the instance ID and so on, but it as well have the column that is called the flow notification URI, where you can find just a regular URL that once you send a post request to, it will resume the flow that waits for an approval. And that was actually for me a breakthrough, like how we can manually modify data in Dataverse and then resume flows so that we can really follow the steps that are completed through the user interface within the Power Automate or Microsoft Teams. So now, speaking about that, one more fun information that you need to be aware is that the flow approvals and Teams approvals are always stored in Dataverse related to the environment where you have initiated them. So there is they're not being created in a default environment all the time, but in that environment where the flow is created that runs the approval process, there we will find information about that tasks which were generated there. And yes, one last more important information is that the action that waits for the approval, that is as well valid for any other action we have in Power Automate that waits for anything. Those actions can only wait up to 30 days. And that's a limitation, not because after the 30 days, the approval gets timed out or whatever, but it's a limitation to the infrastructure, to the architecture, so that as of today, nothing can really work longer or wait longer in Power Automate than 30 days. Now, that doesn't mean that approval is going to be like canceled after 30 days. It only means that the action, that the flow instance which is waiting, is going to be timed out and end up with a failure. However, the approval itself, it will last in Dataverse for years. So if you create a logic that helps you to handle these long-running workflows, then you don't really need to be worried, because at least that feature, so that the approval can take more than 30 days, is built in. Just the action itself is not waiting longer than 30 days. All right, so now what happens in all these scenarios that we have around the approval? So we can create an approval, we can cancel an approval, we can approve or reject an approval, we can as well reassign a task. So in all these 4 scenarios, different information or different data is being modified and written to Dataverse tables. So in case when the new approval is created, then what I've already said, Power Automate or Microsoft Teams is writing data to approvals and approval requests table. So first in approvals, it writes that header information, and then in approval requests, it writes information about every single task being generated through the process. All right, now, and here is one very important information about the approvals. So I've mentioned that this feature, that this solution works on Dataverse. However, to use it, users do not really need any premium license. That is because all those operations, those read-write operations, are being done on behalf of the system account, the Flow, Microsoft Flow account. So it's not really being done through a user, so in the context of the signed-in user, but like a generic system account. And for that reason, users do not need to have any license to work with approvals. However, when speaking about working directly on Dataverse, then obviously you will need that license either per flow or per user, so that you will be able to follow what I will be showcasing in a moment. All right. Now, in the second scenario, so when a task is completed, then the only change that is happening is actually in the approval table. Obviously, in approval responses table, there are written all this information about every single task being completed. However, the main change is being done inside the approval table. So there we'll find just a single information about what is the outcome. Now, speaking about the outcome, this is also something very interesting, because if you choose an approval that is only waiting for either approve or reject outcomes, then the result will always be either approve or reject. So the workflow will be waiting either for all approves or first rejection. However, if you decide to use the custom outcomes, and even if you use the approve reject as the custom outcomes, then the workflow will be waiting always for all responses. So if you have a task that is waiting for 10 assignees and you write responses like okay and not okay, then it will be waiting for 10 okays or not okays, and the result is going to be like a concatenated string, separated or delimited with the comma or semicolon, and it will be just a concatenation of all single outcomes. So like oak, noke, oak, noke, oak, noke, 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 oak, whatever. Not like in case where you're waiting just for the approve or reject, where we'll always have just one outcome. So in the end, when you're using the custom outcomes, then you need to build as well your own custom logic, how to handle the results. Like, for example, to count how many positive versus negative outcomes are there registered, and then make something on top of that. Now, speaking about the reassignment, the only change that is happening is being done inside the approval request table. So where those single tasks are being generated. And here, the old task is being set as inactive, and the new entry is being created for the new assignee with the lookup to that old entry. Now, speaking about the reassignment in Power Automate, there are some principles that we need to have in mind. When working with Dataverse directly, we don't really need to care about them. However, it's really good to just be aware that there are some principles. So first of all, you're not able to reassign tasks which are not assigned to yourself, obviously. You can as well reassign tasks to yourself, and you can reassign this task to the task creator or to the initiator. As said, this is only valid when speaking about the built-in interface, let's say out-of-box interface for working with tasks. When working with Dataverse, then we don't really need to care about those because we can do whatever we want. Now, in the end, when the task is canceled, then again, the only change that is being done is inside the approval table. Here, the result is set to canceled, and all those status reason related columns are as well being set to some cancel related information. Just to inform that this approval process has been canceled. Now, the other thing that is happening, but it is just being done under the hood, is that all the tasks which were assigned in that approval process are as well being set as inactive, so that users won't see them as they navigate to their action items in Power Automate portal. All right. Oh, no, it's not. Thank you. Now it's time for the demos. Okay. Right. Anyways, I have here like a Cloudflow. It's very easy Cloudflow. Its only purpose is to actually assign lots of tasks. So the first action is just creating an approval, and it will be assigning this approval to like 3 employees at this moment. So let's say, let's play that like that. Then the second table is actually writing out the approval ID that I will be using in all these scenarios, because the demos I have are actually working on a manual trigger. So they're not being triggered anyhow automatically. They just need that approval ID for a specific scenario to be passed in manually. And in the end, the workflow is waiting for the approval. So let's say for the first round, we have that task assigned to 3 employees. We have, come on, run. We will get like a response from the first employee. So let's say this will be the John researcher who was as well assigned, and he will complete the task. However, let's give it maybe a second moment. However, where's my task? Okay, for some reason, it's not yet even on the create and approval step. That is odd. Right. Oh, okay. It moved on. So anyway, let's assume a situation where we have a very urgent task, and let's say just 1 employee have completed their task, but the workflow is waiting for all these employees, and well, it just cannot wait any longer. So we would like to complete it like ad hoc with the outcome of our choice. Like in this case, maybe with the outcome approve. So one of those scenarios that we can complete or we can do is to use data in Dataverse to get information about this approval, then prepare that request body that is going to be sent in the end to the flow notification URI, and then actually to send or to update information in Dataverse according to what I just showed you, like what is happening in which table during every scenario, and then to send that flow notification URI, that request body, so that the workflow itself is going to be resumed. So what I'm now showing to you is actually the logic which I'm following in most of the other demos. So I will now just go deeply through it, and I will just save some time in later demos. So first, what the workflow is doing is getting the list of all assigned tasks for that given approval ID, right? So here it is just getting all those approved tasks, which are still active, so which are not canceled, and are related to this approval ID, so for this specific process. Then it's getting this approval record itself, so the header itself, because it contains some information which is needed to create a proper, a valid JSON for the request body. Next, it's getting other responses for this. I mean that has. Sorry. So yeah, it will be now taking other responses that have been made already in that process. So whether someone has already completed their task or not, this is the step that will now look up the approval response table to get any entry related to this approval process. Next, what the workflow is doing is actually creating this request body that is going to be in the end sent to the flow notification URI. So first is getting information about all those users who are assigned, who completed their tasks. Yes, so it is now going through all those responses that it found. So first it is getting details about the users who who completed their tasks, and then is building two objects. So the first object is the one that is going to be used in the responses list. And the second one is just like an array that is going to be used in the response summary list. So these are like two objects within the JSON request body that are going to be sent to the notification URI. And the response list is simply like an array of objects, which each contains information about every respondee who have completed their task, together with information when they completed, what was the response, so for example, approve or reject, and what comments they wrote. Now the response summary list is something much more simpler. It's just like an array of concatenated strings that contains information about the approver, and again, the information about the response and the response date, but no comments in that case. Now the next step that is being done after these two objects are being prepared for the flow notification request body, the workflow is looking up that flow approval table to get information about the flow notification URI for the record that is again related to this approval ID. Now, what I found out, what I already said, is that in this table we will have a separate entry per each action that we have in our Cloudflow instance that is related to approval. So in this case, I will have one entry for the create an approval and the second entry for the wait for an approval. Now, the funniest thing is that this create an approval entry will have the approval ID exactly the same like the approval process, so like this one. However, the second entry has an approval ID that is just like a random GUID. So there is no relation between this action and that action in terms of approval ID. So what I as well found out is that in case this record, and the funniest thing is that this flow notification URI value is stored always with the record that is waiting for an approval. So in this case, with the second record that doesn't have this approval ID equal to this one generated here. So what I found out is that if that first call is returning an empty value for the flow notification URI, then I have to make a second call to that flow approval table. However, this time I need to use the run sequence ID. So the run sequence ID is the value that is the same for every action generated in that specific instance. And I have that run sequence ID because I already got some data responded here, because even though that the flow notification URI is empty, still I have information for the approval ID, like the run sequence ID. So in the second call, I'm asking for the record that has that specific run sequence ID and which flow notification URI column starts with HTTPS. So in that case, if there is like even more than 2 records related to this flow sequence ID, I will get the one that contains that notification URI. Wow. The next step in this scenario is that the workflow is marking this approval process as complete. So it's updating the approvals table with information like the stage is complete, the status reason is completed. The result is the one that is going to be passed by me straight as the trigger information, and the status of the approval itself is set as inactive. Now, lastly, what the workflow is doing, well, maybe above, is composing those JSON objects. So here it is concatenating the approval response array. And so the response summary. And so we have like the responses, that object that you saw being built with the detailed information about all the responses being made. The response summary is just this small array of the brief information. And then all other information is just obtained either from the approval table or from the trigger itself. The goal is that to this flow notification URI, you can actually send any kind of a valid JSON. However, this JSON I'm building here is the one that is having the same schema as the action here is waiting for. So once it receives that kind of a request body, it will simply be able to parse it so that specific information will be available as the dynamic values to be used in other actions. However, what you can really do is to send the whatever JSON you want, just make it to be valid. So you can as well complete or build your own custom approval scenarios where you don't necessarily want to send this kind of a JSON, but you just want to send something else of your choice inside, for your processes. All right, so having that said, let's just hit it and run it. As you maybe remember, if you have any questions, either please unmute or just write down in the chat window. I'm still having one eye focused on the chat. And yeah, so now it's waiting for that GUID. And let's say the outcome is going to be something custom. Why not? Okay, now it's done. The workflow is now running. And it's completed. So once I switch, okay, now you saw, or maybe you haven't because it was very fast, but the icon here on the wait for an approval from waiting has been switched into completed. And so here I can see the information like the response summary. So the one from the response summary concatenated string, plus as well in the responses, I have this object that shows me all those single responses, like what was the approval response and what were the comments if there were any. There is also the outcome which I posted and all the additional information that were sent through that request body. And as I said, because it is following that schema, then all those information is being visible here as the dynamic outcomes that you can use in other actions. All right. So that was the first example. Now the second one, let's say we will have a situation that we're again waiting for some responses. However, one of our employees who should answer to their question is simply out of office. And now in that scenario, if you're just using the user interface approach, you're simply unable to anyhow reassign that task from that person who is on their holiday or anyhow unavailable to anyone else. Because as you remember the principles, the only person who can reassign their task is the one who is assigned a task. And therefore, the only way actually they can complete it would be to navigate to their action items and approvals. And here they would be able to click the task and reassign. But if they are unavailable, then things are going a bit more complicated. So one thing would be naturally to go, for example, to Dataverse, then edit a table from Dataverse in Excel and simply manually write all the data. Or you could do as well as I've done, so to follow those steps that the reassignment actually requires. So now I just need to find the proper demo. Gosh. Oh, there it is. There's reassign a task. So that workflow is a little bit different because it only modifies table approval request. And what it is doing, it is waiting for the approval ID again, then information about who is the current assignee so that it can find the task that we want to reassign from and to whom assign a new task. So first, it is getting information about the record itself, the assignee information, and then it is as well looking up the old assignee information. And what is more important, it is looking up the approval request table to find that entry that is assigned currently to this particular user and for this particular approval ID. So later, once it gets that information, then it is creating new approval entry, which fills in with all this information that is coming from the original entry. So it has to populate all the required columns plus all those not required, but as well important. So all this information is being rewritten from the original task. And in the end, it is as well looking up the original entry, right? So here is the reassigned from lookup that looks up the original entry, and as well the reassigned from index as a string value is as well visible here. And last step is quite simple. So once the new task is created, the old task is being marked as complete, and the status reason is set to reassigned, and the status is set to inactive. So this way, the workflow is sure that this task is simply not being visible to the old user, but is now visible to the new assignee. Okay, so again, I'll just grab that output, so the flow approval ID. And let's reassign it from John, researcher, to myself. I'll just show you that I don't have that task assigned yet, so that it's not a hoax. It really works. So there is no task assigned to me, at least not the task that is titled as M365 UK test 2. So it's going to be from the John researcher. Oops. To myself. All right, and let's just run it. That's done. And that's it. So the workflow run. I can now close it and simply refresh my list of tasks. And there should be the new task. Oh, and there it is. So right now I see this new M365 test 2 assigned to myself. However, when I switch back to John Researcher, so that's his account, and refresh his list of tasks, then this task is now gone from his list. Fine. And now another thing I noticed recently is that even for this scenario, I am being sent an email with information that I've been assigned a task. So it is not being sent immediately, like with like within the scenario that you're just creating an approval process and it is just assigning tasks. However, in the end, after some number of hours, maybe there is like a timer job that is running a scheduled job. You're as well sent this notification, so you as well can complete this task straight from your inbox. All right, so that was that second scenario. Okay, I don't think that actually doing the cancellation is very important. However, what I want to show you is that we can do as well. Yeah, that's the Excel. We can accomplish as well a scenario where oh, or maybe not. Why is that not working? was working. What I wanted to show you is that we would be able simply to complete an approval once a specific number of responses is met, so that we could do something similar to what we have in SharePoint Designer workflows, but I don't really know why it doesn't work. So the goal is that I have my table that is called the flow quota approvals. It's quite simple. Its only purpose is to write down the approval ID and then to write down as well information like how many responses, approvals, how many responses should be made so that the approval can be considered as completed. And what I need to do is to open this table in Excel so that I am able to simply update it because, or maybe not, or maybe I won't be able to update it. What's wrong? Okay, no idea. So I'll just do this somehow different. I'll copy it to my desktop. Yep. No, this is not my desktop. Sorry. I'll go away. Copy it to my desktop, and from here I'll try to run it, because I never had issues with that Excel on my computer, while on that virtual machine for some reasons it's not always working. That I don't know. Right. So possibly need to sign in. Of course, I need to. So that is, in my opinion, one of the, let's say, most powerful examples of how this, the ability to use directly Dataverse information in terms of approvals can be utilized. If only I can use it to show you.
It's okay. I think it's the demo gods, right?
No, I mean, it might be, but it can be as well that there is something really wrong with the platform, or something is happening there.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in the meantime, anyone's got a question, please feel free to ask.
Right. Okay. So no, okay, it works. It works. Fine. So I'll just switch over to these demos. So now let's do again an example that we have, let's say, 3 assignees. And we would like to have an approval being done after at least 2 completes their approval. So now again, I just need to get the approval ID. Yep, that is here. Then, oh, go away. How am I supposed now to, oh, there it is. Then let's write it down to the table. Now, this could be, again, done somehow automatically, like you could have, you could start creation of the approval from an application, and in that application, you would have a field that it would be set to, would be used to define, I mean, that will be asking you to define after how many approvals you'd like to have that approval completed. However, in this scenario, this is just being done through manual update in the table. However, now once I go back to the cloud flows, there is a flow that is called to complete approval after a specific percentage of responses is met. And now what it is doing is the workflow is being triggered every time there is new entry written to approval response table, right? Because this is the one that is actually being storing information about the responses. And this is the one that can be used to calculate how many responses were already made versus how many should be made. So that's the whole goal. The workflow is first getting information about the quota, so like how many responses should be placed, and then information about the request, so like how many tasks were assigned in that process, and in the end, the information about other responses for the current approval process. And finally, it is calculating these, right, just the multiplication of the division made by 100 so that it is written in percent, and then it's calculating whether this is bigger or lower than the number defined in that Excel sheet, in that table that you just saw. So now whenever I complete the workflow, whenever I complete an approval task, so for example, first, John Researcher is going to complete his task. Yep. Well, you could have write a comment, but whatever. Then this workflow is going to be triggered. However, because this is just the first out of 3, so the 30%, right? So just the 33%, blah, blah. Then the limit was not reached. Therefore, this workflow simply terminates its operation. Now, if I go and complete my task, then obviously this will be now 66%, and therefore the approval itself will be completed. So I can now wait here and wait for this icon to be switched into the green check mark one, so that it will notify me that yes, your approval is now completed and it's not waiting for any more responses. Yep. So now you see that the flow runs successfully. And again, in the response summary, I see as well those single responses, so one from John, the other one from myself, as well. The information about the responses is at the top. So first was John, second was me, and there is like even my comment, and the outcome is approved, right? So this way, you can really build logic around, well, you can build more advanced scenarios around approvals, like in this case to approve on once the number of approvals is met. Once a specific number of approvals is met. All right. The last thing I could show you around these automatic or advanced scenarios is to handle substitutions. So what I have built as well here is that I have like a table that is called a substitution. And this table is simply being used to store information about who is going to be missing or absent, and from which to which dates, like between which dates, and then who is going to be their substitute. And then there is a workflow that is triggered every day, like in the morning. And it's simply getting information about all these substitutions which are currently existing in the system. And then for each such substitution, it gets information about the approvals. So once it gets the information about the approval, it is again marking that existing record as inactive in approval request table, and it's creating a new one. So again, it's simply reassigning a task. Now, a more extended version of this substitution system would be that at the end of the substitution, the same mechanism is then reassigning a task back from the substitute to the original assignee. However, that is again just a logic you can create yourself if you feel it's needed. In the end, this is a very useful process because, as said, in cases when someone is not present and is unable to complete their task, however, the task is urgent and is not able to, and it it cannot wait longer than those 30 days or even a week. And we simply don't want to wait until that missing or absent person is back at work. Then we would be able to build such a substitution system or the process that is going to simply reassign all these tasks from people who are on holidays or wherever to employees which are at the office, so that they can approve on their behalf. And yep, that's basically the end of that deep dive. However, well, you just saw some of the examples on how you can use the data from Dataverse to work with approvals. And then I bet you can really find a lot of more use cases and scenarios within your companies to work directly on that Dataverse approval data, not only through the user interface, so that you can really accomplish even more complex scenarios than those I showed you. So thank you very much for being for the last hour, well, nearly an hour with me.
Great stuff, great demos, great slides. Thanks, Tomasz. I really appreciate that. And I think, yeah, we got one question in the chat, but I think you probably covered a little bit on that, but it'll be good to just get a full answer. So good question from Mina. It's around the security and audit viewpoint. Where can you find the logs or details about what flows have been ran?
Well, so basically, to see the runs history, then obviously the only way is to navigate to a specific flow, and there you have a list of the instances of that flow. You can as well use the monitor. Here you have like a cloud flow activity. However, as of today, this monitor only shows you information about the flows that you're an owner of. So you won't see here flows which have been created by others and are even shared with you. So that is not the most maybe informative. Plus, what you could do as well is to use actions from the flow administrative, Power Automate management, or it was Power Automate for admins. One of them had an action to get all those instances of a specific flow, but not here, so possibly management. Right. So here you can list flows, and you can list. Gosh, I'm sure it was here somewhere.
Yeah, you got list my flows.
Yeah, maybe the get flow has that option that allows you to get information about its instances. I'm sure you can find it somewhere here. Not sure where.
No, I mean,
However,
it's in the right area. I think, I mean, because certainly, a few years ago, this wasn't even there, right? So,
right. I mean,
so what?
Basically, this Power Automate management is as well the connector that is that the Center of Excellence is using. So, and the Center of Excellence is actually working like being triggered every day to gather information from all environments for all the flows, and then on top of that is building a dashboard. So, Mina, you can as well try and see the COE, so the Center of Excellence, or just dive into this Power Automate Management connector to see which action returns a list of instances, and then build some kind of auditing yourself. So you can write information about those instances to Dataverse or to SQL, and then build something yourself. But the point is that apart from just browsing directly to a specific flow and then seeing its runs history, you can look at the COE, because that tool as well gives you this overview, bird's eye on your flows on all the environments, like who created, when they were created, when they run, how often they run into errors, and so on.
Great. Well, thanks, Tomasz. I think that really helps. So, I mean, very quickly on that one, in the past, I used to create a SharePoint list in order to log every entry whenever each time the flow was ran. But that's a bit of an old school now. So that obviously creates some overheads to create yet another data in terms of who ran the flow, what was run. So you can store that in the SharePoint list. Obviously, then those items will increase. But yeah, great. So I think, yeah, Center of Excellence, that is the general Power Platform area. So take a look at that. Great. Okay, I think we're out of time, so we're going to start to just wrap up from here. But in the meantime, obviously, we got a couple of minutes. So, you know, if you do have any questions, yeah, then please do put that in the chat window. But just want to say a big thanks to yourself, Thomas, for being here today, and also Todd earlier on for the PowerShell session. Couldn't be done without yourself. So, you know, hats off to yourselves for being there, and also for the attendees. Big thanks to you for your time to be here, and hopefully you've taken things away from us today. But yeah, I've put the link in the chat window for the feedback. It's the same form. So again, it will really help Thomas, please, on that. So please fill that out if you can. And also, you know, like I mentioned earlier, if you have a story or experience to share, then please do submit your session, and I'll take a look at them and also help you out if you need any assistance in that as well. So would be good to see you at M365 UK. I've posted the links as well for the slides, videos on the YouTube. So M365 UK is there for the YouTube channel. I know Todd put the link in the chat earlier, so it will all link to Todd's site as well. So yeah, so watch out for a couple of days, and then you'll get that, so you can share and re-go through some of the things we've gone through today. And again, if you're around in London next month, it will be good to see you. So look forward to that as well, the first in-person event, and you know, by Tom and Chris on that as well. So until then, just like to say, have a great evening here from London, and big thanks to everybody, and be safe, take care. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Thomas.